What is the greatest fear the United States has of China? This is a question posed by a Japanese user on Qura, who also added that the United States would not be afraid of China in this world. There is only one hegemon and bully, and that is the United States. Rules and systems are defined by the United States, and it continues to redefine them. China, outside its own borders, cannot set any rule. Even 10 years ago, when my friends asked me about my views on the future relationship between China and the United States, having lived in the United States for 10 years, I told them that there was no normal relationship in any form between China and the United States. All the United States wants is hegemony. They dictate what is right and what is wrong, regulate how much money you can earn, and which industries you can be involved in. If you don't obey, you are the enemy, and even if you do obey, you will still become the enemy, because they need an enemy, and you could be the one targeted. We all know that China will not succumb, so what will happen next is actually always in the hands of the Americans. What the American people should really be afraid of is the rabble they have elected. Now let's see how netizens from various countries have answered this question. The first is from an Indian netizen. So far, the United States has been using Judaic and Christian values as weapons to obtain whatever it wants by any means necessary, but this approach no longer works today. These values have permeated American media, military politics, commercial trade, entertainment, arts, culture, and the lives of ordinary Americans. It basically uses the American way of doing things to overpower everyone. This approach seems novel and exaggerated, but it is not necessarily efficient. The world has recognized that the resources of various countries are not sufficient to cope with American inefficiency. As realities become clearer and debts continue to rise, when societies and economies experience cracks, the vulnerability of these values is exposed. In the long run, these values can no longer guarantee individual freedom. On the other hand, China has far surpassed the United States. China has broken the so-called successful theories that the United States sells to the world. At every stage of China's development, China has been able to make timely mid-course adjustment. Yet successive U.S. presidents during their campaigns have been peddling garbage ideas like freedom and the American dream to foolish believers, simply telling them to take out loans if they can't afford things. When you learn that during the 2009 subprime mortgage crisis, debt-laden consumers never received bailouts from the U.S. Treasury, you will understand what is wrong with the United States. The Treasury bailed out the banks and protected them, but the people still had to repay their debts. The entire system did not lend a helping hand to debtor. When you see social problems in the United States, such as 14-year-olds getting pregnant, you will understand what is happening to the United States. Meanwhile, in China, children are trained in advanced mathematics at age 15, already prepared to enter related industries, and in fact, on a large scale, they can be hired without formal interviews. China's advantage in skilled labor enables the manufacturing cost of an iPhone to be controlled at less than $400 per unit. If the same product were produced in the United States, the cost would skyrocket 100 times. China has the advantage of scale and is striving to achieve near 100% import substitution by 2025. I'm curious, what else can the United States offer the world? Freedom is no longer about lounging on the couch watching TV all day. The second is from an American netizen. What few people understand is that the United States has always been sustained by propaganda, much of which is driven by commercial interest. The United States has achieved good development over the past few decades, but this is not the result of its own efforts. It is because after World War II, the whole world was like a feast laid out on a plate, ready for it to enjoy. The United States was the only economy that had not been severely hit. In fact, this was a gift from heaven for the interests of the colonists, who were able to enter almost every country in the world at that time. Many people held a common view and were grateful, opening their door. The United States was the savior. The United States quickly rose to become a superpower, neither through economic development like Russia and China, two major powers, and other emerging market countries, nor as we have always boasted because of capital. The question is, have you seen in the past 40 years comparisons between the United States and European countries to show that the situation is much better on the American side? I certainly haven't, because all comparisons are made with Banana Republic, not to mention always bringing up countries with socialist economies that have collapsed, and communist countries. Like Cuba, Sweden has had a high standard of living for over 50 years, which has never been mentioned, nor has it been mentioned that Scandinavian countries, which practice socialism, have improved their standard of living. Remember Japan? Initially people said they couldn't do anything except copy and produce cheap products, but now what little of our electronics industry that once led the world remain. Then Detroit launched a protectionist movement, trying to block imports while pushing increasingly poor quality cars onto American consumers, who could still make huge profits by financing their cars. which were becoming like Yugoslavian cars. South Korea replaced Japan, but at that time, the United States had little competitiveness domestically, and the United States used South Korea as a propaganda model for capitalism, effortlessly funding it and helping it develop its economy. The situation in China is different companies have made huge profits due to China's low production costs and its status as an emerging market, and no one has ever asked this question. If China can produce iPhones and other high-quality products, then why do we believe in inferior products sold here under the excuse of, what can you expect from made in China? It turns out that the Chinese are not stupid at all. We should have noticed that, right under our noses, they have established economic bases in many countries, which is now irreversible, and there's nothing we can do about it unless we make significant changes that are unacceptable to most people. But that's not a viable option after dominating the world and bossing other countries around for more than half a century. It's terrifying for people to see their country being deposed from the throne and witnessing its decline. Instead of making changes, the ruling elite have exacerbated this fear. They can only use China as a scapegoat to maintain their position. The third commenter is from China. Americans are not a monolithic group. Any sweeping statement that Americans are afraid of China is inaccurate. Different social classes and individuals within the same class may have different types of concerns. I know many kind-hearted Westerners who are globalists and are not afraid of China's rise. Some even applaud China's success in eradicating poverty and other developments that bring tangible benefits to its people, which any conscientious person should be happy to see. A situation where everyone has food and shelter. They don't care which country is the most successful in the world, and the Chinese are grateful for help from all over the world. Many Chinese are also willing to do their part to help the many unfortunate people in other parts of the world. Fear cannot stop death, but it can hinder life. We must see the bright side, build bridges of communication, and move towards prosperity together. Rather than falling into a mutually assured destruction scenario, war breeds war, and peace breeds prosperity. The main reason Trump was elected president is that he exploited Americans' fear of China and further fueled this fear through lies and propaganda. Of course, the reasons for this fear differ between ordinary Americans, the wealthy, and the elite. If we want to summarize the biggest concern of the United States towards China, we must consider the emotions of the majority who contributed to Trump's victory. The actions of the wealthy and elite who control the U.S. government will certainly differ from the expectations of ordinary Americans, because their goals are different. Do ordinary Americans really want to fight currency wars, trade wars, and hot wars with China? I don't think so. However, they don't know how to solve their problems, so they continue to support Trump's crazy actions. We should sympathize with Trump's supporters, because they are indeed victims of American politics. What sufferings are ordinary Americans enduring? All sufferings stem from desire, which has nothing to do with nationality. People worldwide desire wealth, a colorful life, fame, power, status, good food, and leisure time. The inability to satisfy these desires leads to their pain. We know that there are homeless people in the United States, obesity caused by unhealthy diets, people relying on food stamps to make a living, high crime rates, frequent racial conflicts, racism, and inequality. Ordinary Americans lack freedom, have a poor education system, student debt, and household debt, etc. The main issues are still food and shelter. Ironically, the United States is also a major food exporter. The wealthy and elite fear class struggle to divert this threat. They direct Americans' attention to China. Relying on others is never a good strategy. Americans must return to their roots to save themselves, to the ideals that America truly holds: non-aggression, which includes freedom, justice, and self-reliance. China's dependence on the United States is the same as the United States' dependence on China. The world is interconnected. We must prioritize the global citizen economy. The fourth commenter is from Spain. I don't think the United States is afraid of China. In my opinion, the American leadership sees that the road to American hegemony has come to an end. They try everything to maintain their hegemony at any cost, even risking the collapse of civilization. That's different from being afraid. The problem is that the current situation has developed to the point where they can't do whatever they want anymore. Many world leaders no longer consider the United States a trustworthy partner. Rather than solving problems, U.S. military activities have created new ones. The American middle class is gradually being crushed because they have to bear extremely high military expenditure, which are more than the combined military expenditures of a dozen countries ranked behind it. A few years ago, I went to China and I thought I would see a nightmare scenario. but what I saw was a country with a thriving middle class, many large cities, and rapid infrastructure development that asks for the United States. Its decaying infrastructure and declining middle class form a stark contrast. China has become an industrial giant, while the United States has transferred its industries overseas. The fact is that the current situation can be foreseen by anyone with a bit of common sense, but due to their arrogance, the American leadership failed to foresee it. This basically leaves the United States with only the option of military means, and that's where fear comes in handy. Fear is essential to sell war to the public. In short, because the United States sees a replay of the decline of the British Empire in itself. Between the 1870s and 1890s, the United States economically surpassed Britain, and after World War II, by establishing an interconnected alliance of pseudo-empires around the world, it gradually replaced Britain as the world's leading power. Since 2010, the United States has missed the opportunity to curb China, and is now powerless to stop China from becoming a top economic and technological superpower. I am concerned that it will lose its hegemony one day because its allies are starting to see an alternative growth and development model stemming from the Belt and Road Initiative, and are gradually shifting towards it on a large scale. As all Star Wars fans may know, fear leads to anger, and anger leads to hate. The fifth commenter is from Japan. This will be the second Cold War, but there are some important differences from the US-Soviet Cold War. China is not eager to export its ideology to other countries. Unlike the former Soviet Union, China keeps its people relatively affluent and not lacking in consumer good. The existing strict censorship system has not generally affected ordinary people. There is no situation like the Berlin Wall, and there is no need for one. So the emotional appeal to Mr. Gorbachev to tear down this wall that resonated globally back then is not applicable here. The Soviet Union went bankrupt due to its rigid adherence to Marxism in the arms race. China has become wealthy and increasingly prosperous due to its philosophy that it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Moreover, the nuclear weapons of China and the United States are not targeting each other, and there is no mutually assured destruction-style arms expansion. The political class in China is seen as a leader in the country's prosperity, presenting a completely different face of communism. India, which is expected to rank among the top countries in terms of total GDP globally, is increasingly inclined to cooperate with a more friendly China rather than an increasingly stubborn United States. Frankly speaking, the chief architect of China's reform and opening up has proven to be a greater leader than Marx and Lenin combined. Moreover, he achieved these accomplishments without relying on bloody massacres. The United States has moved from prosperity to prosperity, while China has moved from poverty to prosperity. China has proven to the world that there is a viable and prosperous alternative to the American model for seeking happiness for the majority of its people. This last point is the key. This is where the Soviet Union failed, where China succeeded, and where the American system is beginning to shake. In my opinion, the United States is a paper tiger. Why do I say that? Many U.S. presidents have claimed during their campaigns that China manipulates its currency, steals American jobs, and has a huge trade surplus with the United States, etc. But soon, they bow to reality, lower their tone towards China, or many issues are left unresolved. But the fact is that it was American companies that decided to transfer manufacturing to China and relocate research and development facilities to China. They didn't do so under the instructions of the U.S. government or China. The United States has not engaged in any self-reflection or taken much action to revitalize its economy, but this is certainly unacceptable to the American people, because they believe it's a communist or socialist approach or a planned economy model. They never ask themselves why, after decades of talking about high-speed rail construction, even a design drawing hasn't come out. Why it's the United States that is gradually falling behind. Chinese netizens, what do you think about this issue? Please share your opinions.